Take a deep breath and allow your thoughts to quiet. Now, imagine yourself standing before a vast brick building, its windows tall, its gates heavy, its chimneys still faintly warm from the morning's coal fire. The year is 1872, and you have stepped just beyond the iron boundary of a Victorian asylum. Not the haunted ruins we see in modern films, not the dim horrors whispered in legend. A world where days were long, rooms were cold, and the boundary between care and control blurred quietly with time. But a real place, part sanctuary, part prison. Tonight, we'll walk its echoing corridors, we'll hear the rhythm of the ward. We'll meet those who lived and worked here, from gentle reformers to overworked nurses, from the privileged to the utterly forgotten, not to shock or disturb, but to understand, to listen, to rest in the quiet reality of history. Your day begins not with a jolt, but with a slow creaking of wood and a nurse's gentle call. The dormitory is long rows of simple beds lined side by side, separated only by thin curtains or nothing at all. The bedding is coarse, but clean. The air smells faintly of disinfectant, coal smoke, and the quiet dampness of heavy walls. You rise when the bell rings, not before, not after. Your clothes are laid out for you, sturdy, identical to the others. If you're lucky, you're trusted to dress yourself. If not, the attendants help you, wordlessly, efficiently. Breakfast is porridge, always porridge, occasionally bread. The asylum believes in moral treatment, a system where routine, labor, and quiet are meant to soothe the mind. Or on a ward where the windows are small, and the voices echo strangely. You may be sent to the laundry rooms, hot, steamy, echoing with splashing water and scrubbing hands. Or to the gardens, your fingers in soil, your back warmed by the rare English sun. Rarely tea, you sit in a long hall with dozens of others. Some mutter to themselves, some stare into space. Some laugh, gently, at nothing at all. There is no rush, only rhythm. No choice, eat, wait, always monitored. Stand when told. After breakfast, the real day begins. If you are deemed capable, you work. If you're restless, you're assigned simple crafts, basket weaving, mat making, stitching linen. If you are ill, you may spend the day in bed. There is order and always supervision. Attendants walk the halls at regular intervals. A doctor visits once a day, sometimes briefly. You may be observed. You may be written about in a notebook you'll never read. The hours pass slowly. Lunch is served at noon. Stew if meat is available, potatoes, weak broth. There is no cutlery for most, only spoons. There are no menus. The afternoons bring silence, sometimes walks in enclosed yards, in groups of 5 or 6, in the age of restraint. Sometimes time in the day room, long benches, blank walls, quiet company. There are no clocks on the walls, but you know when the bell rings again. That it is time for tea, bread, marginal jam, lukewarm water. The day dims. Evening arrives, and you are returned to your bed. Lights are dimmed early. The nurses walk slowly down the aisle. They note your posture, your stillness, whether you sleep. Outside, The wind rattles the windows. Inside, everything is still. And in that stillness, you find a rhythm, not chosen, but imposed. Not joyful, but predictable, and somehow, within that routine, the mind begins to quiet. But who decided this rhythm? Who shaped this world, and why? Let us now turn to a man whose soft-spoken reforms changed the very meaning of what it was to treat the mind. The asylum's rhythm, though strict and silent, was not always so. Step back a few decades to the early 1800s, when lunatic asylums, as they were then called, were places of confinement, not care. Before reform, the mentally ill were often chained to walls, shut in damp cells, or paraded before curious onlookers, seen more as curiosities than patients. But then came a man with quiet hands and quieter convictions. Dr. John Conolly, born in 1794, was not a man of noise. He was not driven by fame. He spoke plainly, dressed modestly, and believed deeply that the sick deserved dignity, even those whose minds had turned inward. In 1839, he was appointed resident physician at the Middlesex County Asylum at Hanwell, one of the largest in England. It was a place of routine suffering, where chains clinked behind thick wooden doors, and patients were kept in line by force more often than care. But Conolly brought with him a single, radical idea, that restraint was not treatment. And in his first year, he made a decision that shocked his peers. He believed in a world where the mentally ill could be soothed by structure, labor, and kindness, not shackles. He banned mechanical restraints. No more manacles, no more straitjackets, no more locked chairs or bars. Instead, Conolly and his team introduced a system of constant observation and gentle redirection. But the idea had taken root that madness was not criminal and care need not be cruel. And most of all the patients, many of whom had known nothing but force, began to show signs of calm. But his record speaks softly of a man who believed against the tide of his time that suffering deserved gentleness. By the late 1800s, the non-restraint movement had reached asylums across Britain, not as law, but as guiding principle. If a patient grew distressed, they were spoken to, not struck. Where history lingers in dust and quiet, and the walls remember what words do not. If they grew restless, they were walked, not locked. Nurses were retrained. Staff were taught to respond with patience, not punishment. It wasn't perfect, there were failures. There was resistance, but slowly, something changed. The corridors grew quieter. The outbreaks of violence declined. Conolly's ideas, though controversial, spread. Other asylums took note. Reports circulated. Of course, not all followed it. Some institutions returned to old methods in times of strain. Others practiced restraint in secret. Dr. Conolly himself never wrote a great book of theory. He was not a man of grand speeches. When he died in 1866, he left behind not a revolution, but a quiet ripple. One that would shape the century to come. And yet, for all the good intentions of reformers like Conolly, time and silence have hidden much. Let us now descend into the abandoned wings. Time moves forward, and the grand halls of the Victorian asylums grew quiet. Many were shut in the 20th century. Some crumbled, others were sealed, a few stand still, vast, empty, forgotten. But their silence is not empty, it is full of fragments. Modern explorers, historians, and preservationists now walk through the remains of places like West Riding Asylum, Severals, and Hyroids, not to gawk, but to listen. To gather, to remember. Imagine stepping into one of these long-abandoned wards. The walls are flaking. Nature has crept in. Ivy finds the cracks in brick, and in the dust, faint outlines of what once was. Here is a rusted bed frame, still bolted to the floor. There, an old ledger, pages yellowed, names faded. One entry reads, agitated. Quieted with tea and walking. Another simply says, no family. Sleeps near the stove, not for praise, but for peace. A private world expressed quietly in pencil and chalk. But beneath the ink lies something more fragile, the echo of a life observed, but never truly seen. Some rooms contain forgotten arty charcoal sketches drawn directly onto plaster. Faces without names, landscapes from memories long lost. These were likely made by patients. In the attics of one asylum, they found boxes of handwritten case notes, thousands of them, describing everything from melancholia to religious delusions. The tone is distant, clinical, and in the basements, sealed off for decades. Tattered uniforms, tin cups stacked in neat rows. A piano missing half its keys. All of it speaks, softly, of repetition, of years lived in sameness, of minds that wandered, within walls that never moved. Even the architecture tells a story. Their designers believed that light and air could help soothe the mind. Some had prayer rooms, libraries, even bandstands. Many Victorian asylums were built with large windows, long corridors, and courtyard gardens. But these gifts often sat unused. Budgets were slashed, staff stretched thin, and the good intentions of reformers were slowly buried under routine. Today, as you walk through these ruins, in person or in thought, you don't hear screams. You hear silence, a heavy, patient kind of silence. And in that silence, you might begin to understand, not madness, but the way society once tried to manage what it did not understand. For even within confinement, not all were treated equally. Not through cruelty alone, but through quiet neglect. Through systems built with hope and then left to rust. Let us now rise from the dust and look once more at those who lived within, not as individuals, but as classes. Let us explore the divide between the wealthy and the poor, between the nurse and the matron, between who was seen and who was silenced. Not everyone inside the asylum lived the same day. Though the bricks were uniform, the lives within were anything but. From the outside, it may seem that all patients shared the same experience, the same wards, meals, treatments. But within the tall walls of a Victorian asylum, there were quiet hierarchies of class, of background, of perceived worth. In many institutions, there were separate wings, one for the working class poor, and another, more private, for those of means. If you were wealthy, your room may have had a window with a view of the gardens. You may have worn your own clothing, eaten slightly better meals, and received regular visits from family. You might have had access to books, music, and private attendance. These were men and women committed by parishes or workhouses. Their days were strictly regimented. Their clothes were issued, their families rarely visited. If they had families at all, some affluent patients were even allowed to walk the grounds freely or correspond by letter with friends and doctors alike. Their job was not one of compassion alone, but control. They distributed food, cleaned, dressed wounds, calmed panic. They were expected to be firm, emotionless, and endlessly patient. But for the majority, the pauper lunatics, as they were called, there was no such privilege. Their wards were more crowded, their names more likely to be forgotten, their stories more likely to be lost. And then, between these two worlds, walked the staff. Nurses, mostly women, worked long hours, moving between silence and sudden chaos. Their own quarters were small, their rest brief. The superintendent might live on the grounds in a private cottage. His family might dine apart, his clothes more finely tailored. They were always on watch, always observing, rarely observed. Above them stood the matron, the attendants, and the superintendent. These roles carried respect and distance. He was both doctor and bureaucrat, responsible for discipline, for budgets, for tone. But even among staff, divisions existed. Male attendants had more authority than female nurses. Doctors outranked them all, and above the doctors stood the institution itself, rigid, unyielding, concerned more with order than with soul, and yet, within this quiet machinery, small moments of kindness flickered. A nurse adjusting a blanket without being asked. A patient singing softly as they sweep the floor. A letter smuggled in or out, a joke shared over tea. These moments rarely made it into the records, but they stitched life together, quietly, a thin thread of humanity in a place too easily painted as gray. And now, as the lights dim in those long, echoing halls, we step back. To reflect, not to judge, nor to pity, but to rest in the stillness of what came before. And so, the doors close behind us. Not with fear, not with drama, but with gentle stillness. You have wandered through the quiet corridors of a world once filled with voices, some loud, some silent, all searching for rest. You have walked beside patients and nurses, reformers and records, through days that unfolded the same way. Over and over, like pages turned slowly in a forgotten book. The Victorian Asylum was not a place of one truth. It held sorrow and kindness, order and neglect. It was built with hope, but often weighed down by silence. And now, its bricks grow moss, its wards are empty. Its records yellowed with time, yet, in memory, in gentle reflection, it still whispers. Of porridge bowls and morning bells, of chalk drawings on plaster walls, of hands that reached out quietly when no one was watching. Tonight, as you lie still, let these echoes settle softly around you. Let the structure of routine soothe your mind. Let the silence of forgotten halls cradle your thoughts. You are not there. You are here, warm, safe, at rest. But the rhythm remains, and in that rhythm, you drift.